The export of our cash and the importing of food and fuel. Should Hawaii be concerned? Today I have with me a renowned soil and plant doctor, Dr. Paul Hepperly, who has traveled throughout the world looking at the environment, soil, economics, and why it's important for us to pay attention. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Tina.
I wanted to really have you here because I think there's some really important paradigm shifts that are going on, and I think this is a dialogue that really needs to be pounded and talked about and looked at and discussed, and communities need to be aware. And I really don't want us to wait until the dialogues, this happens when it's a natural disaster, or like, unfortunately, Haiti.
Right. Most people don't really understand, or they've lost the understanding, that our wealth is related to the richness of our soil resources. But during the Great Depression, during the Dust Bowl, when we were losing our topsoil at enormous quantities, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came up with the saying that our national wealth is directly related to the richness of our soil, and that actually holds true. This gives us much concern because actually, since we started this industrialized and centralized agricultural system, our soils have been depleted anywhere from 50 to 80% of their original capacity. This puts our water system in jeopardy. It puts our economic systems and the very nutrition of our food at jeopardy, which inflates our health costs and our other side effects in terms of the environment. And it's an unsustainable future for us, so that we have to get back away from the oil age and back to the soil age.
Well, and Hawaii is so unique. And what really put Hawaii on the radar for you? You've looked at so many different places. What is it, the dangers if Hawaii doesn't pay attention? What
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about Hawaii is that compared to continental masses, it's one of the most remote places in the world. It's also one of the most fragile environments in the world, but it does have enormous natural resources that are precious. And it's interesting that in the 1930s, in the times of the Depression, actually Hawaii was a net exporter of foods to other nations and was completely self-sufficient.
True.
And that now 90% of all the food that goes into Hawaii is exported from somewhere else, and 90% of all the transportation and fossil fuel, which would be mainly petroleum, coal, and natural gas, is also imported. And this is coming from areas that are politically sensitive and also have monopoly power, so that this is something that is totally against our national interest. And for us to be a model for places like Haiti, where we've had a catastrophe of a natural catastrophe.
An island nation.
And an island nation also, that we have to start thinking that we have to revise the importance of self-sustainability and the improvement of the environment, because as we deteriorate our environmental resources, this is what we live on. So we are creating a false sense of abundance in poverty, and we have to get back to the real values. So that's why I think that we need to shift our paradigm, because you know, following World War II, there was a drive to go to a chemically based agriculture, and this was
more fertilizers, nitrogen.
Right, and this was based on cheap fossil fuel. The only problem is that the oil is now peaking throughout the world, and there's going to be no longer vast resources of this. And we can't afford to do this anyway because of the issues related to the environment and global warming and greenhouse gases. So we need to shift the way we think about things, because the assumptions that we had about what we were doing were completely false over the long term.
Well, and unfortunately, Hawaii and I think Alaska pay the highest gas prices. And here we only have 21 days and what it is, it's a ship coming in to bring our fossil fuel. And the same thing is with the majority of our food, which we only have 8 days. And so for me, when I look around at the millions of people that we have on this island, if something were to happen and those ships can't get here, or if our ports are damaged, or for whatever reason, we're really stuck.
Right. In the September 11th catastrophe, that should have been a wake-up call, but we're having more and more of these catastrophic events, and our ability to survive these events is directly related to us rediscovering self-sufficiency in our food and fuel systems, and actually having triple line economies where energy wins, the environment wins, the economy wins, and also we produce food. And food has to be among the top priorities that we have.
So it's changing our perspective, it's changing our to prosperity, you know, and so it's really taking a look at, because Hawaii can do this. You've been all over the world. Can we or can we not be more sustainable and abundant again?
Well, actually, one of the interesting things, when you look at the top agricultural lands in Hawaii, practically without exception, the majority of the resources are devoted to non-food crops and crops that actually are for exports. And of course, on the island of Oahu, pineapple used to be one of these. Sugarcane also has been one of these things. And these are remnants of a colonial system that no longer has an applicability in our world. And in terms of economics, when there is premium food produced locally, it has an enormous multiplier effect in the local economies.
So when you say multiplier effect, let's talk about that just a little bit. So you're saying job-wise and regenerating the soil and the crops and...
Right. For instance, that if we have $1 that we import from of oil, it will generally go to some entity in the Mideast. And many times these entities are actually actively looking for our political and destruction. And if we have $1 that we produce in food in Hawaii, it actually recirculates in the Hawaiian economy, creating other industries and jobs, and it can actually create $3 or $4 that instead of going out of the economy, actually recycle it inside of our economy in Hawaii.
And you brought some slides with you. So let's take a look at some of the ways that we can really do a paradigm shift.
Right. I like this graphic because, you know, when we start thinking about Hawaii, we have a rainbow of opportunities because of the diversity of the landscape, the natural resources, the abundance of the natural elements that agriculture and food are based on, which is pure water, pure air, and purity in the soil, so that if we start rediscovering the importance of these elements and how they may be cultivated for abundance, we can produce our food first and then our fuel and combat the big problems such as global warming and other issues while we improve the environment itself. In fact, this was a part of the original Polynesian culture that was transplanted from Tahiti. They were very isolated and they had to be self-sufficient. And they had to be able to manage their environment from the top of the highest mountain to the bottom of the sea and the reefs and things like this, because they depended on every single resource and its natural biological life force in order to keep that engine running. And they couldn't use it in a depleting way, because then they would no longer be able to live in isolation in such a both beneficial and isolated situation.
So part of the problem we have is we sort of really become disempowered, and then we've got some big monopolies that are really don't want to hear this, you know. Hawaiian Electric, if we do get some renewable energy, they want to make sure they're getting their dollars just for all those connections. You know, the barges coming in, the PUC. So it's really time to look at a different roadmap. And that's why I wanted you here, because you've looked at countries, nations, and states all over the world. And so your expertise in seeing how we could be prosperous again. I just really feel like it is so important that we have this dialogue, Paul.
Well, yeah, part of the issue is that if we would rediscover some of our traditional real values, we could go back to systems that were biologically based that wouldn't depend on artificial economies based on fossil fuels. And one of the national case studies that shows this is the case of the island nation of Cuba. Because when the former Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba no longer had the aid to float their economy. And now 85% of the food that they need in the capital of Havana is produced within the city limits of Havana. And you know, that means that they can completely support themselves with the food capacity of their agricultural lands. They can produce their fuel out of the agricultural lands, and they can improve the environment all at the same time. And actually, this goes completely against that idea of better living through chemistry. Actually, the chemistry destroys the natural unseen biology, which is the nature of productivity. So like if we go to a little bit more on the graphics, I'd like you to take a look at this photo. And what this shows is some people see a very old woman and some people see a very young woman. But in reality, when we start viewing things, if we view ourselves as creating prosperity, we can produce prosperity. If we see ourselves as being limited and having to go into using like evils of poisons to produce our food, we're actually in an old woman type of state, and we need to start projecting a better thought process so our realities that we project become better and better and we have an abundant future.
And that would really benefit our children, the next generations.
Right.
You know, if we can do this model now and not wait, that's what I think is so important is some people say, well, we can't do it because big money, the lobbyists, this and that. But if the people dialogue and say, this is what we want, why wait for a disaster? Because it, you know, Haiti should be, and 9/11 should really be our flares.
Right. And, you know, if we go back to the graphics, one of the things that many people don't realize is that the biggest source of energy is abundant all around us, and it is the sun. This is a huge nuclear fusion reactor that sheds its life on the green plant world, is captured into the roots of plants, enriches the soil, and provides for the growing of the soil resources which everything can be fed and prospered upon. And if we look at that a little bit different, if we just don't interfere with natural processes, these natural processes create abundance. If we look here, this is a graphic of the mass of abundance that occurs when we just let nature heal itself. And actually the most prolific way to catch the energy of the sun is through what is called the biological web of life. This web of life creates abundance, diversity. It is our natural birthright, and our natural state is that the living organisms, instead of being seen as in conflict, that we have to control everything, are in cooperation, and they're actually aiding each other in their effort to make everything float. They are communicating, and they're looking for the benefit of the whole community.
So it's actually a grand organized design if we just stop and look around and notice it.
Right. And one of the greatest examples of this is not a cotton field. 25% of all of the pesticides in the world are put on that one crop. And it's a crop that was known by George Washington Carver as something that completely depletes the soil and takes the substance out of our lives. So why do we select that this would be a type of system that we're looking for rather than a coral reef? A coral reef is a natural system that is not dependent on artificial inputs and has much more productivity, and even the capture of the structure itself is combating global greenhouse gases in a very significant form. What is needed for that coral reef to develop in its flower and diversity is purity and allowing natural forces to work according to the way they are.
So when you talk about water, Hawaii has its own unique watershed. What are the concerns as far as when we use too much fertilizer and things like that to get so-called super crops?
Well, one of the interesting things is we have two great estuaries in North America. One is the Chesapeake Bay, and the other is the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River drains the croplands of North America, where they grow a lot of corn, which is based on a very artificial system of synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, and a lot of spraying. And actually, the fertilizers in the Chesapeake Bay, for instance, contribute 60% of the excess nitrogen, which is associated with an 80% reduction in the original biological capacity of the Chesapeake Bay, which has been determined very precisely in long-term studies. 90% of the remaining 41% that is left over is from misuse of raw manure from feedlot cattle that aren't allowed to be in healthy conditions and produce substandard products that do not feed people in a way that they should be feed, and constitute actually a disgrace to nature and to the animal kingdom, who are our single most ally in our whole battle for survival. Now, in that type of situation, we need to rediscover the natural behavior of animals, who are our best allies.
So more free-ranging, open range.
Right. And then, like when we're looking at this miracle of developing soil, most of this is an unseen miracle that is occurring underground from the huge mass of roots and beneficial microorganisms that extend and build the plenty. And this is why that when we had a natural environment, we had 5% or more organic matter, which was in all soils. And we have, through this depletive type of industrialized, centralized agriculture, gone to 1%. Mm-hmm. Now, in relation to the water quantity, 100 pounds of the original virgin soil at 5% or more organic matter will capture and hold 200 pounds of water. And with this type of management system that is depletive and toxic, this has gone to 1% organic matter that will hold 30 pounds of water or less. So then when we talk about the urge to have more ability to float our economy through scarce water resources, we have to envision that we are going to be farming differently and more attuned with the nature of biology itself.
And so really looking at not poisoning our water system.
Right, and to look at this a little bit more, the organism that really builds up soils, there are two. It's grass and the animals that eat grass in large herds. In North America, with the before the European colonization, great herds of buffalo, over 110 million animals roamed those plains and fed a slew of people. And presently, in these same plains, with this corn-fed travesty of putting animal in knee-deep in manure and packed with antibiotics and other issues, we only support 40 million head, and their smaller head and their flesh is not as beneficial for us. So that we have to get back to the roots of things, and this is what builds the highly productive soil, so that we have to start freeing our animals so that they can be in natural environments, so they produce products that can supplement our diet in a very profound way, while they're building our environment and also combating issues such as greenhouse gases.
And unfortunately, Hawaii's even given that away. We have less and less egg farms, less and less cattle, less and less chickens. And so, just to be able to sustain if a natural disaster happened, the people here, we have a tremendous amount of people. And we're getting ready to give up some more ag land to build more houses.
Right, and many times, if we look here, this is a slide of the beneficial fungus that actually grows on the roots of grass plants, and this can extend the reach of the plant root system by 1,000 to 2,000 times, mobilizing more nutrients, building the soil in a very conclusive way. And it's something that it's the amount of money that we have to invest to do this is just creating a habitat and respecting the recycling that is going on for these wonderful organisms. That's why purity of the environment is so incredibly important. A lot of this is related almost to a metaphysical type of geometry where things are divided in simple spaces into smaller and smaller divisions, and they create tremendous snowflake things, which is the nature of the soil particles themselves, that become the surfaces that catalyze this wonderful biological activity, which is like a soil reef. And, you know, like, so this is a type of non-intervention that actually yields more benefits than the costly intervention of using our scarce petroleum resources for non-essential production of transportation or for pesticides or fertilizers.
Well, can we talk a little bit also about how that in the long run, if our food is better, how our quality of life is better, and that for your health, you know, the cost of medicine and surgeries, this really reduces the cost in the long run. A lot of times families, you know, they're really on tight budgets here in Hawaii. We have high rents. Our gasoline is the highest in the nation. And then to get the type of food you really want to eat, a lot of times you're sort of hesitating, not realizing the long term that you're saving money.
Right. I'd like to show this graphic here.
Okay.
Is when we have a chemical agricultural system that is based on the petroleum and the fossil fuel products, actually they end up causing more greenhouse gases that go into the air, and that their effect on the soil is to cause products to contaminate the water.
Which Hawaii has to really
Right.
worry about.
But if we look at when we are basing this on the soil, actually what we find is that the greenhouse gases become invested into the soil as a positive climate controlling mechanism, and it pulls the nutrients in a stabilized form so they don't contaminate the water, and it produces a better quality of air. But the really kicker is that when you compare this biological way of producing food, it's higher in nutrients. And one of the things that has been happening as after World War II our soils have been depleting, the nutrition that is in our food has been depleting at a similar rate. And we have actually shown in research at the Rodale Institute that as we build up the soil with biological methods, we build up the nutrient content. And this means that for poor people particularly, we have less health costs, less damage from the toxic trespassing. And in this situation in Southeast Asia, they found that there were 6 times more health costs in small farmers using a conventional chemical agriculture than the ones that were using and had converted to organic agriculture. So health costs are eating our nation alive.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
In 1960, 6% of our GMP went to healthcare costs. Now it has gone to over 20%, whereas in 1960, over 20% of our food dollar of our dollars went to food, and now it's less than 6% that go to food. So this can be seen as the high cost of cheap food because it reflects in deteriorated health statistics and productivity of our populations.
Yeah. And then for the next generation, I mean, it's on the rise at more diabetes, more health concerns. So if we don't look at this now, you know, we're going to have people that are disempowered and not even able to work, just needing to go to the doctor because of this and that. And then Hawaii, if we don't look at it for our food source and for our fuel, we're really, who's going to be able to afford to live here?
Right, and it's very interesting that actually going back to a Hawaiian diet is one of the things that they've shown that can improve people in terms of diabetes and obesity, which are 2 of the major problems of poor health, particularly among the Polynesians who have lost their traditional lifestyles.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly isn't isolated to them, because actually throughout North America and the industrialized, centralized economies where cheap food has become the standard, health statistics are deplorable.
And I know we can't really talk about everything I'd love to talk to you about in a half-hour show, Paul. So give us a little bit of what would the roadmap for Hawaii to be prosperous? Because we're sustainable, but we're not even really sustainable in a healthy way.
Well, you know, what I'd like to show in this graphic is that actually organic or biological agriculture can address poverty reduction, food crisis, climate change, diversity issues, and it's the closest thing that we have to a panacea. And what demonstrates this is the Rodale Institute, because they started with a completely depleted farm and they completely regenerated it through biological farming methods. And they did that in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Agriculture during the administration of Jimmy Carter, who understood that we had to look at alternatives because of the fuel crisis. So we've come completely back to circle, and instead of having a depleted environment, we can have a very prosperous environment through biology, not through chemistry. And what we have to start rediscovering also is that our values are critical, that economics and science are not opposed to each other, but that we need to have a spiritual choice for life, growth, and values and tradition. And we have to understand that we're all interconnected, and this is not about killing things, pesticides, etc. So, you know, like this idea that somehow we can change the nature of life itself, how arrogant is that? Not organic, arrogant. Excuse the Freudian slip there.
Okay.
Because, you know, some people said, you know, like because they asked me, said, well, is there anything scriptural that would say that altering life is something that you wouldn't want to do? And I would bring them to the first book in the Bible, Genesis, that says, each organism was given to mankind for their prospering and their prospering and multiplication, and each organism was to reproduce according to its kind. More clear than that, I don't think there is anything, and it's repeated over and over again in Genesis. You don't have to read very far. Take a look at it, and actually communities of faith should take this seriously, because actually this is living your faith. Is if you're eating foods that are greatly altered and are contributing to the breaking of the fabric of life itself, it's sacrilegious.